You check your phone. Not because you need to. Because somewhere, right now, someone might be forming an opinion about you. Carl Jung had a name for the mechanism behind that reflex. The persona, the mask you wear so the world approves of you. And here is the fact that should stop you before this video even begins. Most people spend more mental energy managing how they are perceived than they spend building who they actually are. Think about that. Every comparison, every glance at someone else's life, every silent scoreboard running in your head, that is fuel. Fuel that should be going into your own becoming. Instead, it is burning on a stage you never agreed to perform on. You already know this feeling. The exhaustion after a room full of people. The flinch when someone disagrees with you online. The quiet panic of being left out of something that does not even matter. Jung described what happens when a person finally stops feeding that stage. He called it individuation. And what it costs you is not comfort. It is the audience. By the end of this video, you will understand why indifference is not coldness. It is the most disciplined form of power the psyche can produce. Here is the promise. Not a trick to stop caring what people think. A complete shift in where your identity gets its evidence from. Right now, for most people, identity is a crowdsourced project. Approval is the currency. Comparison is the accounting system. And the persona, the social mask Jung spent his career studying, is the product being sold, updated daily based on market feedback. That is exhausting by design. Because a self built on other people's reactions has no floor. It has to be rebuilt every single day in every single room. Jung mapped a different foundation. He called it the process of individuation, becoming the specific, undivided person you actually are, instead of the character built to be accepted. Not selfishness. Not isolation for its own sake. A redirection of energy, away from the constant, low-grade audit of how you are being received, and toward the much harder, much more rewarding work of finding out who you are when no one is grading the performance. Every minute spent monitoring, adjusting, performing, is a minute not spent developing. And the moment you stop asking what they think of you, you free up the exact resource you need to become someone real. This is not about becoming indifferent to people. It is about becoming indifferent to their verdict. There is a difference, and by the end of this video you will feel it. Because what Jung mapped out almost a century ago still explains why comparison drains you, why the crowd pulls you back every time you try to grow, and why the people who finally stop asking for permission become impossible to control. Let's start with a distinction Jung insisted on, one most people never learn. Being smart and being conscious are not the same thing. Intelligence is processing speed. Consciousness, in Jung's sense, is how much of your own psyche you can actually see. You can have a brilliant mind and still run entirely on autopilot, reacting to the same triggers, repeating the same patterns, explaining your life with reasons you never actually examined. Jung called this living from the persona instead of living from the self, operating a mask so smoothly for so long that you forget it is a mask. Jung himself lived through a version of this collision. After his break from Freud, he spent years in what he later called a confrontation with his own unconscious, deliberately sitting with images, dreams, and impulses he had spent a lifetime being too civilized to look at. He was already one of the most respected minds in psychology at the time. Intelligence had never been the problem. Consciousness of his own depths was what he had been missing, and it took years of deliberate, uncomfortable work to close that gap. That is the same gap sitting inside you right now, just smaller and far less examined. Here is the mechanism. The persona forms early. It is the adapted, socially acceptable version of you, shaped by what got rewarded and what got punished. And because it works, because it gets you love, safety, belonging, the mind stops questioning it. It becomes automatic. Comparison is one of the persona's favorite tools. Every time you measure yourself against someone else, you are not thinking. You are running a program installed for you a long time ago, checking your rank, adjusting your performance, reacting instead of choosing. Jung's core insight here was simple. What stays unconscious does not disappear. It starts running your choices for you, and you end up calling the result your personality. That idea should stop you. Because most of what feels like just who I am is actually just what you never looked at. Think about the last time you scrolled and felt worse afterward. That was not weakness. That was the persona doing exactly what it was built to do, scanning for your position in the group. A conscious person can still feel that pull. The difference is they notice it happening. They see the program running instead of being run by it. That noticing, that gap between reaction and awareness, is the entire beginning of individuation. Not more intelligence, more consciousness. And once you can see the autopilot, you can no longer pretend it is simply who you are. Which is exactly the moment most people get uncomfortable. Because it means the drained, exhausted, comparison-driven version of you was never mandatory. It was only unconscious. So here is the real question underneath all of this. If most of your reactions are automatic, how much of your life is actually yours? And here is the uncomfortable part. You cannot answer that question from inside the autopilot. The persona does not announce itself. It simply feels like your personality, right up until the moment you catch it mid-performance. Hold that question. Because the next mechanism is the one that keeps most people from ever answering it. If what you just heard felt uncomfortably familiar, if you recognize that autopilot running your own comparisons right now, this is exactly why staying here matters. The rest of this video is not theory. It is the map out of that autopilot, one piece at a time. So subscribe now, because what comes next explains why the pull back into the crowd is stronger than you think, and how to stop it from deciding your life for you. Jung did not just study individuals. He studied what happens to a person's mind inside a crowd. And what he found was unsettling. Inside a group, a person's individual conscience can quietly go dormant. Not because the person is stupid. Because the group offers something the isolated ego craves. Safety through sameness. Jung called the collective pressure to think, feel, and want what everyone else thinks, feels, and wants, the pull of mass-mindedness. And here is the mechanism that makes it so effective. The mind is wired to read social consensus as a survival signal. If everyone around you believes something, disagreeing with it once felt, to your nervous system like risking exile from the tribe. Exile used to mean death. So the mind still treats disagreement with the group as danger, even when the group is just a comment section. This is why comparison feels so involuntary. It is not vanity. It is an old survival circuit, checking your position relative to the herd over and over without asking your permission. Jung's observation was that the more unconscious a person is, the more that person becomes indistinguishable from the mass around them. Same opinions, same fears, same performance of identity borrowed instead of built. Think about how much of your day is shaped by what you assume others expect. The opinions you rehearse before saying them out loud. The purchases, the captions, the tone you use, quietly calibrated to what will be accepted. None of that is necessarily wrong. But almost none of it is chosen either. It is absorbed. Jung spent much of his later work warning about exactly this, the danger of a modern person dissolving into what he called the mass, a collective identity so loud it drowns out the individual voice underneath it. He did not mean crowds in a stadium. He meant something quieter and far more common. The slow replacement of your own judgment with borrowed consensus, one small accommodation at a time, until the borrowed version is all that is left. That process rarely announces itself either. It feels, the entire way through, like simply being reasonable. And the tragedy Jung pointed to is this. A person can go an entire lifetime inside the mass mind and never once ask which of their own values actually belong to them. Individuation begins the moment you separate your own voice from the echo of the crowd. Not by rebelling loudly against it. Rebellion is still a reaction to the group, still orbiting the very thing it claims to reject. A person who defines themselves by opposing the crowd is still letting the crowd write the terms. True individuation is quieter than rebellion, and far less interested in being noticed. Real separation is quieter. It is simply noticing, this thought is not mine, this fear is not mine, this want is borrowed, and choosing again from somewhere more honest. That single act, repeated enough times, is what starts pulling a person out of the mass. And the mass, Jung warned, does not let people leave quietly. It has ways of pulling a person back, subtle guilt, gentle mockery, the raised eyebrow that says you used to be more fun, more agreeable, more like us. Most people feel that pull once, decide it is not worth the friction, and quietly rejoin the crowd they had barely started to leave. Which brings us to the reason most people never try in the first place. That reason is fear, but not the fear you'd expect. It is not fear of failure. It is fear of truth. Jung noticed something strange in his clinical work. Patients would circle around an insight for months, sometimes years, clearly capable of seeing it, and still refuse to look directly at it. Not because they lacked intelligence. Because the truth threatened something more important to the psyche than comfort. It threatened identity. Here is the mechanism. Your sense of self is held together by a set of beliefs about who you are, what you deserve, and how the world works. When new information contradicts that structure, the mind does not experience it as neutral data. It experiences it as a small psychological injury. So the psyche defends. It rationalizes. It minimizes. It finds a reason the information does not apply this time to you. Jung saw this defense operating everywhere, not just in therapy rooms. In friendships that quietly stopped, when one person started changing and the other could not tolerate the reflection that created. In careers people stayed in for decades, long after the truth of their unhappiness had already arrived and simply been refused. This is why most people prefer psychological comfort to truth. Comfort asks nothing of you. Truth asks you to rebuild. And rebuilding, even when it leads somewhere better, still requires walking through the demolition first. There is no version of psychological growth that skips this part. No shortcut that lets you keep the old identity intact while somehow also becoming someone new. Every serious change Jung documented in his own patients passed through the same uncomfortable middle, where the old self was already cracking and the new one had not yet solidified enough to stand on. That middle is where most people quit, not because the truth was wrong, but because the demolition felt unbearable without yet being able to see what was being built in its place. Jung noticed this same defense show up in a very specific pattern with his patients. The inside itself was rarely the hard part. People could usually see it intellectually within a single session. What took years was allowing that insight to actually change how they lived, because living differently meant admitting the years spent not living that way had been, in some sense, a mistake. The ego, Jung observed, will often protect its own history before it protects the person's future. It would rather keep you consistent than let you be right. Ask yourself honestly, is there a truth about your life you have already sensed and quietly agreed not to look at directly? That hesitation you just felt, that is the exact mechanism Jung was describing. It is not weakness. It is the psyche protecting a structure it built to survive. But protection and growth cannot both win forever. At some point, the cost of avoiding the truth becomes higher than the cost of facing it, and the psyche starts sending louder signals. Restlessness that will not resolve, a fatigue no amount of rest seems to fix, a nagging sense that something in your life is quietly expired. Those signals are not random. They are the same mechanism that protected you earlier, now working in reverse, pushing you toward the very confrontation it once helped you avoid. And that turning point is where the next mechanism begins, the one that decides what happens to everyone who gets close to your truth before you're ready to admit it yourself. The moment you start facing what you avoided, something predictable happens around you. People react. And Jung had an exact explanation for why. He called it shadow projection. The shadow in Jung's model is everything about ourselves we have refused to acknowledge. The traits, impulses, and truths too uncomfortable to claim as our own. And here is the mechanism that matters most. What a person refuses to see in themselves does not vanish. It gets projected outward onto someone else, usually someone who is doing openly what the projector has repressed in silence. This is why the person who starts thinking independently so often becomes a target. Not because they did anything hostile. Because their clarity is a mirror. Someone watching you stop performing, stop over-explaining, stop needing their approval, is unconsciously confronted with everything they have not allowed themselves to do. And instead of feeling inspired, the unconscious mind often feels accused. So it projects. It calls your calm arrogance. It calls your boundaries coldness. It calls your clarity a phase. Jung's own break from Freud carried a version of this same dynamic. Two brilliant minds, close for years, split apart in part over ideas neither could fully tolerate hearing from the other. Each saw something in the other's theory that threatened his own. Whatever the full history, the pattern Jung later formalized in his own work was already visible in his own life. Proximity to a differing perspective can feel, to an unintegrated ego, like an attack on its very foundation. Jung's insight was that this reaction says almost nothing about you, and almost everything about the unresolved parts of the person reacting. Understanding this changes everything about how criticism lands. When someone attacks a version of you that no longer exists, or judges a boundary they wish they had the courage to set themselves, that is not information about your character. That is a shadow looking for somewhere else to live. It is worth noticing how often this shows up in ordinary, unremarkable moments. The friend who suddenly goes cold when you mention a goal you are actually pursuing. The relative who jokes about your changes just a little too pointedly. The colleague who needs to mention, unprompted, that they could have done the same thing if they wanted to. None of these people are villains. Most of them have no idea they are projecting anything at all. That is exactly what makes the mechanism so effective, and so easy to mistake for genuine judgment about you. This does not mean every criticism is projection. Some feedback is real and worth examining honestly. But there is a specific texture to shadow-driven attacks. They are disproportionate, they arrive fast, and they focus on you as a person, not on anything you actually did. One useful test Jung's framework offers is proportion. Real feedback usually addresses something specific you did, calmly, and leaves room for discussion. Shadow-driven attack rarely does either. It escalates quickly, it generalizes from one moment into a verdict on your entire character, and it resists any evidence that might complicate the story. Learning to tell the difference is part of what Jung meant by psychological maturity. And once you can see projection happening in real time, it loses its grip on you. The accusation stops feeling like truth and starts looking like what it actually is: someone else's unlived life, aimed in your direction. This brings us to the part of the process Jung was most honest about, the part most people are never warned about in advance. Individuation creates distance. Not because you push people away. Because as you stop performing the version of yourself built for approval, some relationships simply cannot survive the change. They were built on the old persona. When the persona goes, so does the agreement that held certain people close. Jung called this the price of becoming psychologically whole, and he never pretended the price was small. Here is the mechanism behind the ache. Belonging, for most of human history, meant sameness. The moment you develop a perspective the group does not share, some part of the old sense of belonging quietly ends. That is not failure. That is the toll. Think of it less like punishment and more like a fee charged at the border between the crowd and yourself. Everyone who crosses pays it. No one gets to individuate for free. Jung himself paid this exact toll during the years he called his confrontation with the unconscious. Colleagues distanced themselves. Some questioned his professional judgment. For a period, he later admitted, he was genuinely unsure whether he was pioneering something real or losing his footing entirely. He kept going anyway because turning back would have meant abandoning the one part of the work that was actually his. This is exactly why so many people turn back. The loneliness feels like proof they made a mistake. But Jung's observation points the other way entirely. The discomfort of that distance is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the exact sensation of a self finally standing on its own foundation, instead of borrowing one from the crowd. And here is what almost no one tells you about that toll. It is not a debt you keep paying forever. It is a one-time cost at the border, and what waits on the other side of it is the thing this entire video has been building toward. Because that solitude is not the destination. It is the price of admission to something Jung considered one of the rarest states a person can reach: functioning immunity to manipulation. Here is the mechanism. Manipulation of almost every kind needs one thing to work. It needs your identity to still depend on external approval. If someone can make you feel less than through disapproval or more than through flattery, they can steer you. Every guilt trip, every subtle threat of exclusion, every reward dangled for compliance. All of it is aimed at the same target, the part of you still asking the crowd for permission to exist. Jung's work on psychological complexes explains why some of these levers work so precisely. A complex is an old emotional wound with its own charge, sitting just under conscious awareness, waiting for the right trigger. Someone who knows, even instinctively, where your complex lives can pull it with a single sentence, and watch you react in a way that feels involuntary because in that moment, it is. Individuation does not erase the complex. It brings enough light to it that the trigger stops landing in the dark. Jung's model explains why individuation quietly disables that target. Once your sense of self stops depending on the room's reaction, the room loses its leverage. Not because you stopped caring about people. Because you stopped needing their verdict to know who you are. This is the direct payoff of the solitude you just paid for. The very isolation that felt like a loss becomes the thing that makes you ungovernable by other people's opinions. Think about the people in your life who seem hardest to control. Almost without exception, they are the ones who no longer flinch at disapproval. Their calm is not an accident. It is the structural result of having already walked through the fear of truth, the projection of the crowd, and the solitude of individuation, and having come out the other side still standing. That is not arrogance. Arrogance still needs an audience to perform for. This is something quieter and far more stable. It is a self that generates its own evidence, instead of importing it from the reactions of a room. You can usually spot it by what it does not do. It does not need the last word. It does not need the room to agree before it can relax. It does not need an audience to confirm a decision that was already made internally, days or years earlier. That quiet, unbothered quality is not the absence of caring. It is the presence of a self sturdy enough not to need constant confirmation that it still exists. And once that shift happens, comparison starts to lose its grip almost on its own. Because you cannot compare a foundation you built yourself to a performance someone else is still putting on. There is simply nothing left to measure. This is also why manipulation tends to escalate briefly right before it fails completely. Someone used to controlling you through disapproval will often push harder the moment it stops working, raising the stakes, testing whether the old lever still has any grip left. Jung's model predicts exactly this. The final, loudest attempt of an old dynamic right before it loses its power for good. Recognizing that moment for what it is, rather than mistaking it for a sign you are doing something wrong, is often the last step in the process. So here is where all of this lands. None of this makes you better than the people still caught in the mass mind. It makes you someone who remembers what that felt like because you lived there too, and some days you probably still catch yourself slipping back into it. That is not failure. That is being human. The difference individuation creates is not superiority. It is recognition. When you see someone anxiously comparing, performing, seeking approval, you are not looking down at them. You are looking at an earlier version of yourself, and you know exactly how heavy that weight is because you carried it too. Jung warned specifically against the opposite outcome. A person who mistakes clarity for superiority, who uses awareness as a new mask instead of dropping the mask altogether. That is not individuation. That is the persona wearing a more sophisticated costume. Real individuation stays warm. It stays humble because it never forgets where it started. It can sit across from someone still deep in the mass mind, still performing, still comparing, and feel something closer to compassion than contempt, because that seat used to be yours. The goal was never to become detached from people. It was to become detached from their verdict while staying fully, genuinely close to them as people. Detachment from judgment and disconnection from others are not the same thing, no matter how similar they can look from the outside. One isolates you. The other, paradoxically, is what finally lets you show up for people without needing anything back from them in return. Here is the choice this video keeps circling back to. You can keep spending your energy managing how you are seen, comparing, adjusting, performing for approval that was never guaranteed to arrive. Or you can redirect that same energy toward becoming the specific, undivided person Jung believed you already are, underneath the mask. One of those paths keeps you tired, endlessly rehearsing a performance the crowd will forget by tomorrow. The other one costs you an audience and gives you back yourself. Jung spent decades of clinical work watching people choose between those two paths, and he was clear about which one actually led anywhere. The comfortable path preserved the persona. The difficult path built a self. Only one of them was still standing, fully intact at the end of a life. The choice is not comfortable. But it is yours, and it is urgent because every day spent performing is a day not spent becoming. So subscribe, stay close to what comes next on this channel, and start paying attention to the moments today when you feel the old pull to compare. That pull is not your enemy. It is your invitation. The only question left is whether you are finally ready to stop asking the crowd who you are.